Well, good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of Pastor on the Porch. We find ourselves in the last, I would almost say, quote unquote, because it's not really a normal day, but normal day of Jesus's life. The Wednesday of Holy Week, the Wednesday before the crucifixion, the Wednesday before the Last Supper, the Wednesday of the last week of Christ's life. The last day where we're not doing intentional celebration of this week. Instead, we are living our lives and going about our lives in a normal sense of direction. But everything changes tomorrow, particularly tomorrow evening, as we as a Christian family sit down and take part in the Last Supper. The Last Supper, which is not just the supper, but also is a time in which Jesus shows us what humility really looks like in our lives. Jesus takes part in an activity of hospitality in which Jesus, as a being, knowing what is known, goes to the level not of high priest, not of king, instead of servant, to wash the feet of the disciples. Think about that. Now I'll go into more detail tomorrow, little plug here, at noon at First UMC when we explore this a little more. But in each of these moments, this is going to die. In moments, we find ourselves crying out for Jesus in a different way. We find ourselves crying out for Jesus in a way that only Jesus can instill in us. We find ourselves crying out
Robert 14 Randolph.
this week for we know what is to
10-7 and
come,
22.
but at the time of the death,
Edgewood Terrace Road,
of the crucifixion, at the time
David 18 Randolph.
when Jesus was living, they were not 100% sure what was happening in these next few days. We are able to look back and see and hear and read the entire story through the Gospels with different accountings of each day, different accountings of what exactly happened in those moments, and different perspectives of how things occurred in those times and in those days. But in each and every one of those accountings, the same activities took place. Wednesday was the last full day in which Jesus did his ministry. Thursday, Jesus gathered his disciples, knowing that death was imminent, sat them around the table, fed them, gave them a meal that now is very symbolic in our Christian life. and allowed us to see what humility really looked like with the washing of the disciples' feet. Each of us is commanded in a different way. Each of us is called in a different way. Each of us works through things in a different way. But in all those ways, those means, and those callings, it is important for us to remember that Jesus is at the center. The resurrection will come, we know that. The second coming will come. We're not sure when. If you were in the church of Acts, or the church where Paul was preaching in, you thought the church and Jesus was going to come again in your lifetime. It's thought that Jesus was supposed to, quote unquote, come back within a year or two and live in the world like he did during his ministry. But Jesus has yet to come back. Jesus has yet to reincarnate. Jesus has yet to fulfill the promises that are laid out before us. This Easter season, as we acknowledge the Last Supper with our services tomorrow, as we acknowledge the murder of Jesus Christ on Friday, as we acknowledge the placing of Jesus Christ in the tomb, and as we acknowledge that the tomb was not strong enough to hold Christ in it come Resurrection Sunday, Easter Sunday, let us not forget the ministry that we are charged in the absence of Christ to proclaim. Let us not forget the ministry that we are charged to do in the absence of the physical Christ. And let us not forget the humility that we are charged to show in the absence of the physical Christ that lives inside and in the spirit of each and every one of us. We have a mission as Methodists to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. It seems simple, it seems pretty basic. And yet we as Methodists, we as a church family, we as a congregational family, we as whatever designation you want to put on that notion, fall short every single day. Now granted, in the space and in the place in which we find ourselves here in the Bible Belt, in central North Carolina, in rural North Carolina, rural-ish North Carolina, it's hard to evangelize. It's hard to walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, do you know who Jesus Christ is?" It's not the easiest conversation we can have. But what is easy is to live like Jesus. What is easy is to act like Jesus. What is easy is to allow ourselves to be Jesus Christ in each and everything that we do. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, as we go about our individual days, as we go about our individual tasks, as we go about those moments in our life in which we find ourselves interacting with others, what does it look like to show the new commandment? What does it look like in our lives to show and live the new commandment to love like Jesus loved? For that is the commandment in which he told us at the Last Supper. That is the commandment in which is above all other commandments that we have learned. That is the commandment that we, as Christ's followers, are supposed to live by. What happens when we forget that commandment? What happens when we forget that commandment is hatred, divisiveness. What happens when we forget that commandment to love each other and love all of God's creation? Are moments in which we as humans show ourselves for who we really are. What happens when we forget that commandment to love each and every one of God's creation? As we get polarization. We get moments in which we cannot agree to disagree. We get moments in our lives, in our schools, in our city council meetings, in our places of business, and even in our churches, where hate wins over love. Now, that's not something that I personally want to experience. A place in which hate wins over love. But unfortunately, we as a society have gotten to that point in so many places in our lives. So what happens when we quit letting hate win over love? We quit letting decisiveness win over love. We quit letting ourselves be split in two, and instead live, work, and honor the commandment that we are given to love each other as Jesus loved us. It is then and only then when we as Christians, Christ followers, are able to find ourselves, find where Christ is leading. Is Christ leading you to to the woman at the well? Is Christ leading you to the woman hemorrhaging? Is Christ leading you to the lepers? Is Christ leading you in a direction in which you as a human being feel vulnerable? If we aren't able to follow those leads, if we aren't able to live into that commandment, if we aren't able to go out and do what we are called to do, then what is this weekend all about? If we aren't able to do that as Christ followers, as Christian people, as children of God, as whatever label you want to live into, then what is this weekend all about anyway? If we aren't able to forgive those that have been forgiven by God, what is this weekend about? If we aren't able to live into a life in which we are living in a harmonious space with our neighbors, what is this weekend about? If we aren't able to be the hands and feet of Jesus, then why bother celebrating this week? Why bother? If this week is instead about coloring Easter eggs and the Easter bunny and bringing those baskets filled with toys that will undoubtedly be played with for 5 minutes and then be set aside, what is this weekend about for you? Explore in yourself what this weekend is about. Explore in yourself what these next few days are about. I invite you to come by the cross at Mount Lebanon or Level Cross if you're in the area, and have a time of prayer, even if it's just in your car near the 3 crosses that are placed at the churches. A moment of silence, a moment in which you individually experience the love of Jesus Christ in your own physical body. The pyramids will be changed accordingly. They are purple now. They will go black for Friday and Saturday. And Sunday morning they will be white. May you come by if you're in the area and take that moment, that brief moment, and experience the suffering, experience the glory, experience your life in Jesus Christ. And as we go this evening, may each of you who are viewing this tonight, tomorrow, or beyond, know that you are loved by Christ. Know that you are a gift of God. And know that you alone can not only make a difference in the life of somebody else, but you alone can start the change that Jesus made that faint day, where Jesus alone changed the world into a place in which we are able to gather, we are able to worship, and we are able to find ourselves in the Spirit of Christ. So go in peace this evening and each evening this week, and allow yourself some time with Christ and some time with the Lord. For each of us is a gift of God, and may we celebrate that gift of God, and may we celebrate the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ this weekend. Amen.